We are happy to be here for the 53rd Foundation Day lecture series. On behalf of the Institute and on behalf of the academicians across the globe, I welcome everyone to this talk today. I request Professor Shalendra Mohan, Director CIL, to welcome our star speaker of the day, Alexandra Eichenwald, and also welcome the audience. Thank you.
Namaskar. Good morning to you all. Honorable Professor Alexandra Eichenwald, Professor Umarani. It's so wonderful to see you all here on 53rd Foundation Day lecture series organized by Institute of Indian Languages. I would like to extend a special welcome to our guest of honor, Professor Alexandra Eichenwald, who will be speaking after this welcome. As we know, the Central Institute of Indian Languages, we have completed 52 years in development of all Indian languages, and our task of promoting linguistic development, linguistic harmony, teaching Indian languages, and contribution towards emotional integration of India for the last 52 years, and we will be continue doing so. Once again, I welcome you all to this 53rd Foundation Day lecture series, which will be delivered by, this is 12th one in the foundation. After 1 month, we are going to, having this 12th lecture by Professor Alexandra Eichenwald. I welcome you all the participants for a wonderful lecture that to be listened by all of us, and that will be delivered by Professor Alexandra Eichenwald, ma'am. Thank you once again. I welcome you all to this Foundation Day lecture series. Over to you, Professor Uma.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Mohan. I'm very much privileged and honored to introduce our speaker, Professor Alexandra Eichenwald, to this august audience. Of course, she needs no introduction as she is one of the most well-known figures in linguistics, especially in typology. Nevertheless, I would like to make Alexandra Eichenwald, or Sasha as she's fondly called by everyone, is an adjunct professor at the Center for Indigenous Equity Research at Central Queensland University. She is also an Australian Laureate Fellow, Foundation Distinguished Professor of Linguistics, and Director of the former Language and Culture Research Center at James Cook University, and consultant on South American languages for Oxford English Dictionary. She is honorary life member of the Linguistic Society of America, fellow of the Australian Academy of the Humanities, and of Academia Europaea. She is a major authority on languages of the Arawak family from northern Amazonia. She has written several grammars and plenty of articles. To mention a few, grammars on Varekena in the 90s, a grammar of Taryan from Northwest Amazonia in 2003, the Manabu language of East Papua New Guinea, that was an Oxford University publication in 2008. Of course, all her publications are by renowned publishers. She also has plenty of essays on various typological and areal topics. The other major classifications, for example, one of the books which many of us, including me, consider it more like a Bible of classifiers. Classifiers, a typology of noun categorization devices. This is used extensively in India especially in many places where you find classifier languages. For example, the Northeast India, where I worked for 8 years, we have included this book in our syllabus. So it's one of the textbooks we refer to in teaching typology of classifiers. Books on evidentiality, imperatives and commands, languages of the Amazon, the art of grammar, how gender shapes the world, serial verbs, and the guide to gender and classifiers, which is forthcoming, I believe. And also another interesting book, I saw the dog, how language works. There are several other books. She has done extensive fieldwork on a variety of Arawak languages from the Upper Rio Negro region in Brazil and the Sepik region in Pianji. She is the editor of the Oxford Handbook of Evidentiality and co-edited with RMW Dixon, another legendary figure in linguistics, and especially typology. She has co-edited the Cambridge Handbook of Linguistic Typology with Bob Dixon. Her CV is very long and her achievements are a lot. I would like to just mention a few more things here. She has presented several papers, more than 170 papers in various national and international conferences in a variety of countries. Her edited books are 33, scholarly monographs about 25, articles in refereed journals about 59, book chapters and papers 125, and those are all written in English. And as you all know, she's a Russian Australian linguist, so she has papers in other languages, in Russian, 21 papers on in verbal and aphasia studies in Russian, Hebrew studies in Russian, Yiddish, and Portuguese, Indo-European and Uralic languages and culture. She has written them in Russian. The titles are translated into English. There are several others. She has contributed to various fields, American Indian languages, and so on and so forth. Several plenary addresses. She has bagged several prizes and awards. Sasha, I'm very, very happy and proud to say that you have been a recipient of Alexander von Humboldt Research Award, also Centenary Medal, Travel Award for from the SIS. Several other awards are there. An honorary member in various learned societies, editorial boards. The list is very long. She's a member in various editorial boards, many journals, Lingua, Study Linguistica, Asian languages and linguistics, language and linguistics in Melanesia, book series like Cultural Linguistics, Springer Verlag series, Guides to World's Languages, and so on and so forth, many more. It's really a pleasure and honor once again to welcome you to the CIL virtually. And it's wonderful to have you with us as part of our Foundation Day celebration, which goes on from July 17th. Today, Sasha is going to talk on one of a kind, on the utility of specific classifiers. Being one of her admirers on this topic, classifiers, I'm as keen as the rest of the audience to listen to you. I once again welcome you and request you to take over.
Thank you so much. I'm honored and humbled by nice words from Professor Shailendra Mohan and Professor Uma Papuswamy. It is really a huge honor to me to present what I have to say, especially at the Foundation Day lecture series at the institution, even if it's virtual, that I have been always in admiration of, which is the Central Institute of Indian Languages, the main center of documentation of the remarkable diversity of India and the Indian subcontinent. So many thanks for inviting me. And I would like this talk, of course, you can record it, you can send the talk and the slides anywhere you would like to. I can send you an up-to-date version. I would like this to be not so much presenting the results as presenting a start for a new conversation about, a sort of short question. What do specific classifiers or classifiers in general actually do? And I would also like to acknowledge the land of the First Nations peoples that at least we here are on, and all the other sides of the world are on. Right here, we are sitting on the land shared by Yidinji and Yirganji people. And as you will see, I will be quoting just a little bit of data of the Yidinji language, called Yidden. Well, you will see it will be, as Uma so nicely said, from the work of legendary figures in linguistic typology, Bob Dixon. So let's start. One of a kind on the utility of specific classifiers. So what is this talk about? Well, we all kind of know, I think, that, or we think we know, that noun categorization devices, for which I just for short use a cover name classifiers, are a means of classifying reference in terms of basic cognitively salient parameters. So those would include humanness, animacy, sex, shape, direction, orientation. So just whether it's up or whether it's sort of vertical or horizontal, consistency and function, easy.
Sasha, sorry to interrupt you. Can you make full screen?
If I make it full screen, then I won't see you, but it's okay. I think we'll be all right. In addition to that, we have in some quite large system, and we'll get to that, we find additional terms whose application is sort of contradicts what I've just said, because they're restricted to a limited set of reference, or even to just one single reference. So what do they classify? So, for instance, numerous languages of mainland Southeast Asia, if you look at them, have, all the usual suspects. They have classifiers to do with shape, to do with animacy, but they also have very specific classifiers in the domain of social hierarchies and human interaction. So you may find the classifier for an emperor, you classify for monk. So what do? They just tell you who is a monk, or do they classify the society? And that's the question. Languages with multiple classifier systems, which I will tell you what it is, or many of you probably know, it's when you have the same morpheme in various environments. Suppose a language is spoken in a riverine environment, and it will be very likely to have a special classifier for canoe. Okay, so what do these specific classifiers actually do? In fact, it appears that rather than categorizing entities in terms of very general features, salient for humans, such classifiers with specific meanings and limited applicability serve to do a slightly different job. They highlight items which are important for the socio-cultural environment of the speakers, and in fact, their means of subsistence. What is special about these classifiers? It is interesting what happens to them if a practice or a hierarchy they reflect undergoes attrition. It may go together with the language obsolescence or just language change. They also occupy a singular place in language acquisition, language dissolution, which often goes like the opposite way of language acquisition. It's an aphasia when people are losing their language ability. And also they have a very special place in the history of development of classified systems of all kinds. Okay, so this is what I'm going to talk about. Then there are a couple of questions which require an answer, I guess. Why is it so that there are some classifier types that just never have terms with specific or unique reference? Well, this question will be also addressed at the end of this study. Now, the phenomenon of specific classifiers contributes to a classical debate about which categories actually get named. And it is a debate which was started, and obviously it's sort of continuing now, but it started in cognitive anthropology, reconciling a dichotomy, which I called putative, it hasn't been sort of established like a real dichotomy, between a utilitarian view advocated by Hahn 1982, whereby you name what you need. You use tables, okay, you'll have a name for tables. Okay, makes sense. And an intellectualist view, which means that you name cognitively salient categories. So like there is a cognitively salient category of, say, stars, and so you have that They have now totally no use, but there is something cognitive about it. So how do the specific classifiers actually fit into that, into what people have names or categories for? So let's just get straight into it, and you'll forgive me if I'm partly repeating what everyone already knows, because we need to build a bit of a sort of like a common background, you could say. What are noun classifiers for? I'm sorry, noun categorization devices. I made a mistake. I will never say it again like that. It is nonsensical what I just said. Noun categorization devices. They're a means of categorizing or classifying reference in terms of their semantic features. They vary in their expression, so they can be, depending on the language type, they can be affixes, prefixes, suffixes more often than prefixes. There is a whole sort of explanation for that, and if you want, I can give you references. You could just write to me. I can send you references, or they can be independent words. They can be clitics. Interestingly enough, very occasionally they can be expressed through, say, vowel change or ablaut, but it happens. So what types do we have? First of all, we have numeral classifiers. It's such a pervasive feature in the languages of East Asia, South Asia, Oceania, and North America and South America. They're used with number words and quantifying expressions. And numeral classifiers divide into two subgroups, sortal and non-zero. Sortal classifiers categorize the referent in terms of its intrinsic properties. Shape is the most obvious one. So if we look at Korean, the sortal classifier kaipi applies to small elongated objects such as cigarettes. So by saying, I'm sorry, I don't really speak Korean. I had a student who sort of tried to teach me, but well, he did a very, very good piece referred to as Lee 2014. So if you use this classifier kaipi, we know we're talking about either a pen or a cigarette or something that sort of belongs to this class. Mensural classifiers are a way of measuring or quantifying units of a referent, which could be mass or count, again, depending on the language. There are lots of various, which is why I had to write a 535-page book, now writing a new one. It is something that's language specific, can be mass or count. Measuring or quantifying units in terms of their intrinsic properties. So I really like that. This mensural classifier when in Korean refers to quantities of currency. So we're talking about when. We know it is a type of Korean currency, which is actually when. Now, we also have small noun class and gender systems in the languages of Europe, Africa, and of course, Eurasia. Of course, in India, you have lots of such absolutely fantastic systems. And Americas, I should put South Asia. These are expressed with agreement markers on adjectives, demonstratives, modifiers with a noun phrase on the verb. So somewhere outside the noun, but they could be expressed on the noun. So an example, which is pretty sort of simple, is the one from Portuguese, where you say a menina bonita, and this a tells you all about it. It is a feminine singular form, so it can only be a girl. And if you say o menino bonito, this o there tells you it can only be a boy, right? Then there is also noun classifiers. Noun classifiers are a very limited phenomenon in terms of its distribution across the world. They are associated with the noun itself, but just within the noun phrase. There is no kind of appearance or no sign of these noun classifiers anywhere outside the noun phrase. And normally the entity is characterized in terms of the generic type it belongs to. So as I promised, here is Yidden for you, whose land we're basically sitting on now. I'm saying basically people dispute that, but that's what I think. So in Yidden, in Australian language, you just won't say, the girl saw the wallaby. It's not what you say. What do you say then? You will use a generic noun classifier. And so you will say as something like the person girl saw the animal wallaby. Bamal, yaburungu, minya gangol, wawal. So now, noun classifiers are a feature of a few languages, like they're found in Australia, across the whole continent, as far as we can say, because lots of languages became extinct before anyone could sort of do any research. It's also a feature of Kanjubal and Mayan languages, and this is what Colette Craig in 1986 described them really very well. And you now probably know her as Colette Aikhenvald. And they're also found in a couple of Western Austronesian languages, probably in one South American language. That's it. They're really very limited, but nevertheless, they're very useful. How they're different, you might ask me, from English sort of collocation like this evil woman Sandra hates languages. Well, it is different, and we can talk about it if you want. But because for one, these noun classifiers are well, obligatory in a way that if you omit them, you will sound like a sort of strange speaker. And also because there is a limited number of them and they do particular jobs. So they have particular functions. They're also a little bit similar, as Uma has just reminded me, I didn't mention it here, but I mentioned it in my book, of class nouns. Class nouns are like English berries. You've got blueberries, blackberries, well, strawberries, off you go. But again, class nouns are different and they do not really play the same function. Again, if we need to discuss that, we could do that as well. There was a volume which I edited jointly with a colleague, Elena Mijas, in 2019, and there are a few pieces there that discuss the difference between noun classifiers as you have in Yidden or in Hakaltek and class nouns. So that's your noun classifiers. Why am I talking about it so much? Because they will be important later on. You'll see some examples which I really like. Now, then we also have possessive classifiers. These are the ones that occur in possessive constructions and characterize the possessee, the possessed kind of item, in terms of its or his or hers inherent properties, and also the way in which it can be possessed or handled by the owner. So let's use an easy example from an easy, well, comparative, easy from a Arawak language, Palikur, which is spoken on the border between the Brazilian state of Amapá and French Guiana. So it's almost like sort of Frenchified. You know, you cannot just say your dog. You can't say pipero, it just makes no sense. People look at you saying, what do you want to say? You need to say your pet dog, pipero. Then there is also verbal classifiers, which occur in the predicate, which characterize the intransitive subject object in terms of its inherent features, which again, we'll get to them a bit later. There are two further, much less well-attested types, locative classifiers, which are associated with adpositions or location markers, and deictic classifiers, which are used as demonstratives and deictic expressions. And there is also a really fascinating phenomenon for which I have a soft spot, which is multiple classifier system, whereby all these, all or some of these contacts require a classifier morpheme. And, well, you will now, at some point, you'll see why I'm sort of raving about this multiple classifier system, because one of those systems from an Arawak language, Taryan, as you may have heard of, will play quite a role in this talk. And just to make sure we are on the same page, as people say here in Australia, the term classifier will be used to cover the continuum of noun categorization devices. Of all these devices will be called classifiers. Now, what's the point of having classifiers? Well, they're very useful, actually. They reflect the linguistic construal of entities in terms of recurrent and salient features. So what is long, what is round. And also their cognitive importance lies in their propensity to organize reference based on universal and recurrent parameters. So they basically classify things. But do they really? Okay. Well, before we get to that, I need to say that each individual type has its own preferred set of semantic parameters, by which I'm trying to say that not every type of sort of classifier will have the same parameters. Like there are a few instances of numeral classifiers in South America, for instance. There is no human or animate classifier. So how do you say two dogs? You will say two vertical dogs, things like that. And the principle of classifier choice may be fully transparent or fully opaque, depending on the system. Even in a, well, I suppose we all know how difficult sometimes it is to learn genders. Like people say, oh, German gender, forget it. It's totally opaque, which is it. It is not, but it's difficult in certain ways, especially for non-native speakers. For numeral classifiers, we'll get to the classifier tua, which is one of the tua. You apply to a table, you apply it to an animal, you apply it to a ghost. Believe it or not, you can even apply it to an elephant. And this is what we'll get to. And then in classifier systems, you may have generic, specific, or superordinate, subordinate relations. And I won't really touch that much here because I can't touch everything. So recurrent parameters of categorization includes human versus non-human. Almost ideal system in Kuruh, a Dravidian language. There is a new grammar by Kobayashi in Turkey, but well, basically my original source for whatever I learned about Kuruh came from one of the publications of the institute, which is really quite wonderful. So ideal human and then non-humans, including children, because children kind of are not trained enough to be humans, whatever, I'm sorry. Now, there can also be human, animate, inanimate, shape, function, consistency. And one of the most elaborate classifiers and classifier systems, in this case, we are talking about numeral classifiers, in a Dravidian language, is this impressive system in Malta. Of course, the grammar by Mahapatra, which is a main kind of reference for that, was published by the Central Institute of Indian Languages in 1979. And every source, including MNO 1956 and my Bible on Dravidian languages by the late Professor Krishnamurti, mentions Malta as one of the most complicated ones. So look at that. You have gen for human, mak, non-human animates, dara, sorry, maybe I'm not doing the retroflex properly, long, large objects. So for rivers, you'll say 3 rivers. You can't just say tini, nadi. You have to say tini, dara, nadi. Kati for long, small objects. For pencil, sorry, there's a typo. Panda, long, flexible objects. Para, long, pods of fruits. So a type of banana, for instance. A pata for flat and broad, but not necessarily thin like cloud. Pata without the retroflex for flat, broad, and thin things like a sheet of paper. Kanda for flat, broad, like cotton things, 3 blankets. Gort for round and heavy things. Fruits, which are not like bananas, so they're sort of round rather than oblong. And round light things for mushrooms. So you can see how much is packed into classifiers, how many semantic parameters and how they reflect perhaps the perceptually salient categories, which are important somehow. I mean, they're important. In addition to that, Malta doesn't stop there. There are at least 5 specific classifiers. These apply to just one entity. So you have kep for village. Again, you say tini, kep, kepdu, 3 villages. Man for tree, ker for grass, kari for hole, then a cave, kuji for reflection. And the question is, these unique classifiers, actually they are of repeated type because it's the same form as the noun itself. And so what do they do? Why are they here? And what do they classify? And if we look sort of further afield into languages with lots of classifiers, say, look at Indonesian. Indonesian, according to Snedden's 1996, quite wonderful grammar actually, has at least several dozen numeral classifiers. I like this at least because it means that it's almost like an open-ended set, but we'll get to it, why it can get to be open-ended. Well, the most frequent are orang, that everyone knows. Well, you will know it from orangutan, but it's also classified for humans. Seorang guru, one teacher. Ekor for non-human animals, like 2 snakes, dua ekor ular. And you have bua for inanimates. Tiga bua meya, 3 tables. Very good. Now, further choice of classifiers for inanimates is based on shape and function. So you have batang, which also I think means tree, at least in closely related Minangkabau, it's a word for tree. Bidang, flat spread out things. Bentuk, round and curved objects. All very perceptually salient categories. It's almost like, well, not so much like, but a similar kind of pool of set of categories as you saw from Aalto. But in addition to this, there are at least a dozen specific classifiers, including kaki for umbrella, kuntum for flowers, and on it goes, quite a few. Now, let's look at another language with a large set of numeral classifiers. I took a paper by Aikhenvald and then his grammar of Lao, and just am showing you a selection of highly specific classifiers. I think Lao has at least 80, and specific ones which Aikhenvald calls classifiers of restricted semantics. And it's a very fortunate term. We'll get to it. There are maybe, well, I think at least a dozen, if not more. So look what there. Dung with a tone. Number 3, any net which evenly spaced holes. So it's sort of restricted referent, but not unique. Gong, monks, as I mentioned before. Ta, rice seedling beds. Man, corn cobs and rice ears. So really the classes are, well, it's not necessarily perceptually cognitively silent parameters. It probably is something else. So what is there about monks that make them form a separate class in the Lao culture? Well, I almost answered my question as I was phrasing it. It's because monks are important. Corn cobs, rice ears, well, it is a rice-based culture. So ta, rice seedling beds, again, it just shows you that certain objects are so salient, you really have to have a class for them, almost like a separate drawer in your classification wardrobe. However, this is not universal. And what do they actually do? They just tell you that a monk is a monk or a rice seedling bed is a rice seedling bed. What do they do? What is the utility of classifiers which are assigned to a narrow semantic range of reference or even just to one reference? In a sense, well, we were saying, or maybe I was quoting Cruz and John Lucy and various other wonderful people. Okay, classifiers, we call them classifiers because they classify something, but these don't. They don't really classify anything as such. They convey little of any information as to the cognitive patterns, which may reflect the basic principles of noun categorization. Okay, their job is different. They do reflect social and cultural practices. They offer insights into the dynamics, and I'm not sort of using this word lightly, of how people live and what they value. Dynamics, well, it's a bit of a catchword if you sort of read Australian newspapers. It's all dynamics everywhere. But in this case, it makes sense because the way these classifiers survive or don't survive reflects the dynamic nature of the society and of the language that may actually reflect it. So let's just now delve into the semantic range of specific and unique classifiers. I'm calling them unique to sort of account for the fact that sometimes a classifier, just as you saw from Aalto, may cover just one referent. Specific, the ones with sort of restricted set. Now, it appears based on my so-called database, because I look at every language I can put my hands on. So it's about maybe now 700-800 languages. Specific and unique classifiers would belong to the domain of function or functional interaction and inherent nature of reference. So not shape, not animacy, but function and inherent nature. Classifiers which reflect social structures and categories, well, you can say domain of social interaction. I would follow Denny, well, 1976. He's quite a remarkable scholar who basically was the first person to show that social interaction is a type of functional interaction within the society. So it's still there. So let's just go to 3.1, where we are going to talk a little bit about the domain of social categories and social relations as reflected in classifiers. Then we turn to classifiers covering important objects, means of subsistence, and features of landscape, which is, you could say, inherent nature of reference. So, social categories. Numerous languages of mainland Southeast Asia, as we probably, I sort of alluded to it when we looked at Lao, have elaborate sets of specific classifiers within the domain of human categorization, covering social interactions, relationship, entities, and hierarchies. And interestingly enough, specific classifiers in the domain of social categories are among what we now call sociolinguistically sensitive categories. They reflect the society, the relevant divisions of people, and they are very often sensitive to social changes and hierarchies. Now, why I'm particularly interested in it now, because 2 years ago, in 2019, we had a workshop on the integration of language and society. And there, and now the volume is coming out this year, in about a month's time, and I'm prepared to share it with you. And this volume specifically addresses other things as well, but also specific classifiers, how they reflect sociolinguistic structures. Let's just get to an example. Throughout the history of Thai, which is a Thai Kadai language, classification of people has links with an elaborate vertical social structure, which means that it's a very, very tight hierarchy. And Tony Della published quite a few absolutely wonderful articles, including this one I refer to here. It also correlates, this classification also correlates with speech styles, and it's quite amazing. But I won't tell you about speech styles. In the first comprehensive study of the phenomena of social structure and how it's reflected in language by Mary Haas, well, at least in English, it was the first one. The following 5 numeral classifiers were given in a descending hierarchical order. So you have high royalty on, high royalty monks, then you have monks, then you have high officials or lower royalty, sort of princes, minor princes, as Tony Dill used to say. I think his nanny was a minor princess, so this is how he knows it all very well. And then you have Nai, individuals slightly above the common people in rank or position. So, and then you just have Kon, which is any normal person. And there was a further classifier, Fraon, noted by Mary Haas in 1964, covers royalty. People argue whether it's really used or not. It is obviously in the Aryan borrowing. And the hierarchy reflected in the system is actually, well, somewhat, but very, in actual fact, reminiscent of the Thai semi-feudal Sakdina system of precise social ranking, which was abolished only 10 years before Mary Haas's original work in 1942. Since then, of course, things happened, and 2 classifiers, Khan, which is lower royalty and high official, and Nai, individual slightly above the common people or rank, shifted to just not being classifiers for people as such, but as elegant equivalents of the general human classifier Kong. And that probably is the result of slight changes in the Thai social structure. Now, let's go back to Lao. What about Lao now? Thai spoke in a monarchy with the dominance of Buddhism as a major religion. As we know, categorization of human in Laos will be different simply because it's spoken in the Republic of Laos, and there is no royalty. So the numeral classifier Khon covers any human. Well, it doesn't cover divine beings and monks. There is a special classifier for monks we saw before. And there is a classifier for Tan, for important official, irrespectable people. So you can see how it shrinks depending on what type of society we have. Now, Zhuang, a Northern Thai language, there, the system of specific classifier whose choice would be determined by social rank and status in the religious hierarchy is even less elaborate. Well, Zhuang, well, I wouldn't call them small, it's millions of people, but they are probably the largest minority in China. They've never had a nation state on a scale comparable to Thailand or Laos, and neither have any major religious institutions played any role. They're basically still animists, still, whatever, they respect their own religion, and consequently, the language lacks those specific classifiers whose choice would be determined by social rank or religious position. And there is a wonderful book by Mike Lu or Chang Yao Lu dealing with that. He's a Zhuang himself. You want to classify humans? Fine, do it by age and gender, but there's no social position. So what we can say is that semantic specific classifiers correlates with the societal structure. Noun classifiers may also reflect social distinctions. Let's go to Jacaltec, a Canjubala Mayan language from Guatemala. There are special terms for male deity and female deity. Social status may be reflected in a different way, adding a semantic parameter of respect. So mom, which was described by Nora England, the same family and same subgroup as Jacaltec, has classifiers for respected older men, respected older women, and further classifier for someone of the same status as the speaker. So of course, in every society, there is respect, but this is a language that highlights it in the classifier system. Now, back to Australia. Noun classifiers in Australian languages have a special term for initiated men. I mean, male initiation is very, very important. It's sort of initiated versus non-initiated, almost like different social classes. Murimpata, I don't know if many of you probably heard of that language. It's one of the, maybe I'd say 20 perhaps, Australian languages that's still spoken by children. And there is quite an interesting young scholar, John Mansfield, who described younger people, Murimpata. It's the Daly River in Northern Australia, area in Northern Australia. It's sort of around Darwin. And the township is called Wadaye, and it's really, it's quite amazing. It's a very synthetic language. People still speak it. The youngest people obviously simplify certain things, but it's quite amazing. And look what Murimpata does. It distinguishes Aboriginal people, which also covers human spirits, in opposition to classifier Ku for non-Aboriginal people, which covers other animals and their products. So all of us, as we are foreigners to the Murimpata people, we're not First Nation people of Australia, I don't think, none of us, we will be classed together with dogs, which is fine, I don't mind. Now, now establishing correlations between political systems and their hierarchies and the system of classifiers. To me, it would be a really interesting topic for just focused research. One thing that's always been sort of bothering me, and I've never got, I've tried for 22, 23 years, answer the question, how do political upheavals affect those classifiers which reflect social and religious categories? So, pre-revolutionary Khmer had a number of numeral classifiers for clergy, royalty, and the image of Buddha, and they're reported in, well, there is a book by Karen Adams, 1989, and all we know is that the Khmer Rouge revolution did affect terms of address and perhaps classifier system, but we don't know, really, we don't have any facts, so that would be a topic to investigate. Now, let's now get, so we have ascertained, I suppose, that specific classifiers in the domain of humans correlate with structures and hierarchies relevant for the societies in which languages are spoken. And so, do specific classifier terms for objects and functions which appear to be particularly salient for the speakers and their livelihood. And so we go to section 3.2. I called it the imperial horse. I just thought it was a nice name, a nice title, but you will see why I start with elephants, then we'll go to horse. Remember, I mentioned these elephants classified with Tua. However, the status of elephants, who are very important in the Thai culture, is reflected in the ways in which they assign numeral classifiers. A specific numeral classifier exists just for domestic elephants. Chwak, I'm very sorry that I haven't been able to reproduce the right symbol, but it's okay. It's from the noun rope, originally from a 19th century expression for elephant lasso. So it is from a, from a specific noun to a classifier, which has sort of, slightly broader meaning. We'll get to that. There's a wonderful article, I recommend it 100%, 150%, some Americans say, by Janta Malaga, 1988, who shows that there was an edict or sort of order by a king saying that, look, from now on, please don't classify, don't use a simple classifier, to a general classifier to classify domestic elephants because they are important. And wild elephants can be categorized with the general classifier TUA. Remember, I mentioned that. This classifier TUA is something totally remarkable. It is used for animals, ghosts, clothes, furniture, swimming suits, anything, lots of other items. I thought I'd show you the difference between domestic, you see, a sort of chuak type elephant, and wild elephants in Thailand who do whatever they want. So you can see the difference in status just by the way they're dressed. So now to the imperial horse. Mandarin Chinese has at least 120 numeral classifiers in current use, and you can see there are lots of sources. Not all of them agree. And of the 22 core classifiers, which Mary Erbo identifies the most frequent in day-to-day use, 2/3 categorize reference in terms of general categories of shape and form. So we have extension, like classifier for long things, classifier for flat things such as rope. But there are about 1/3 which have only a single common referent and are focused on culturally valued items, which include Ben for books. Well, we know how valued books are in the Chinese culture. Shou for verse, Ding for hats, and Pi for horses. Here is the horse for you. As Mary Erbo puts it, all these things are highly valued. Not only is the written word venerated, but horses were the imperial animal, sort of almost the sign of the empire. And we don't have the empire in China anymore. Yet we do have the classifier. Hats display the official rank, and depending on what hat you wear, you deserve or not a certain amount of respect. So, horses important enough to be assigned a special classifier. And here are some imperial horses from, I think it's 15th century painting or something like that. And on it goes. I just thought I'd give you another example from Xu Huiling's PhD. Jieyang, dialect of Chinese, has a special classifier used for films or plays. So for film buffs like myself, it's nice. And more. Of the 154 numeral classifiers in Korean, at least 12 have highly specific reference. You have kok for song, chal for characters, hwan, bowl-shaped small traditional medicine. It's unique reference. In Japanese, you have snatches of music or talk, temples, kan, flutes, dances, pieces of dance, music, and on it goes. Numeral classifiers thus reflect cultural preoccupation of speakers and their way of life. Remember how Lao has special classifier for nets, rice seedling beds, and corn cobs and rice ears. We can, you just look at the system of classifiers, say, these people probably fish and plant rice, and you'll be right. You don't even have to go to Laos, plus you can't now. Just from your computer or your imagination, you can deduce it. And more. I think Ludmila Hokhlova probably will share my love for traditional Nivkh, a Paleo-Siberian isolate. And I love this language. Unfortunately, it's on the way to extinction, mostly because it's probably the only Paleo-Siberian language way in the East, shall we say, that does have numeral classifiers. They normally don't. Speakers of traditional Nivkh, before they were sort of, before the society was destroyed by the Soviet invasion mostly, used to depend on fishing as their primary subsistence. And the language used to have 22 numeral classifiers, over half of which would cover specific reference, denoting objects relevant for the traditional way of life. And the classifiers would reflect culture-specific vehicles, sledges, I'm sure you know what they are, boats, and also various types of fishnets, and other devices as well. It's a little bit difficult to translate, but even so you'll see what we've done here. Classifiers are normally suffixes to lower numbers, 1 to 5. This is one issue about classifiers, numeral classifiers, that we can address at some point. I did it in various books, that if you have classifiers, you will tend to use them with lower numbers rather than with high numbers. Some languages use them with every number. And a selection of specific social classifiers is in table 2. The choice of other classifiers is your usual suspects: animacy, dimensionality, shape. Look at these specific ones. You've got sledges, boats, fishnet cells, which are tiny little things, fishnet strips, fishnets and fish spears, fishnets for fishing, hunchback and Siberian salmon. So imagine it's different from different fishnets I use, so I can't explain that. Poles for fish spears, poles for drying fish, they're different poles, and they warrant different classifiers. Again, you can almost describe the way of life just looking at classifiers. Mensual classifiers, another case in point, they reflect the means of handling items as units with reference to their quantity. In Korean, they may denote a typical quantity of reference, again, typical for the ways in which people live, like side, 20 strands of threads in textiles, or traditional paper, or items in use. And again, in Minangkabau, West Austronesian language, it's very close to Indonesian, with about 100 classifiers. Mensual classifiers will reflect types of reference like lombo tombo for large amount of tobacco. Of course, these people are smoking, so sorry about that, but they are. And specific ways of their arrangement, like fish on the skewer. Now, mensual classifiers in traditional NIF also used to reflect culture-specific ways of handling salient objects, all fishing and handling fish and smelt, which is a tiny little fish. And so you can see it's a picture of traditional NIFs. They, of course, don't live like that anymore. And this is all the dried fish. Noun classifiers. Noun classifiers, we can recall that they occur with the noun itself, not conditioned by the presence of any other elements within the noun phrase. Northern Australian languages of the daily era, including Murimpata, have special classifiers for traditional implements like thu for strikers and Murimpata, like thu kurangata, boomerang, you know what a boomerang looks like, but here it is for you, and a club and a spear, and well, you have different types of spears and different classifiers. So again, classifiers tell you how people live. Ngajitimere is from a language from the same area, closely related. Again, you see classifier for bamboo spears, strikers, fire, liquid, digging sticks, large woomers, cane grass spears. So you see different spears have different classifiers. It's something about them. Noun classifiers in Mayan languages are same, sort of go the same way. Corn plays a special role in the history and subsistence of the speakers. So we have a classifier for corn in Hakautek and Akatek. And possessive classifiers is the same. They tend to reflect culturally important parameters. So human languages from California have a special possessive classifier for domesticated animals. Great. We know that they have early sort of domestication of animals. And also in Yucatecan languages and many South American languages. And a classifier for a pet as well. So they had animal pets. And actually, this is what we saw in Palicur, an Arawak language from Brazil, French Guiana, where you just can't say your dog. You have to say your pet dog. It was very interesting, the picture. I was trying to find some nice picture of the Palicur people. Of course, the dog is in the middle. So ubiquitous dog in Palicur. And that Maca, a minority Mataguayan language from Argentina, has a possessive classifier for cultivated plants, shows that they had agricultural practice. So on it goes. In Musawi Mira, which is an Oceanic language in New Ireland, it's an island just off the coast of Papua New Guinea, they are water-oriented. And of course, they have a possessive classifier for watercraft, which is an important object for the island culture. And in Pohnpeian, a Micronesian language, has a special classifier for land. And this is associated with an importance of land ownership. It's a great book by Elizabeth Keating on that. It's a Federated States of Micronesia. When we can travel again, it's a great place to visit. Mokilis, also Micronesian, has special classifiers for earrings and mats. Each of them are not just mats or just earrings or just anything. They play a role in cultural attitudes and performances, but they're like little beacons of cultural importance. Now, what about classifiers in multiple environments I promised to talk about? Well, landscape and means of subsistence feature within specific classifiers in languages with large classifier system, where you have classifiers as sort of numeral classifiers, possessive classifiers on adjectives, and various other demonstratives and various other locations, contexts. So let's have a look at Taryan, an Arawak language from Northwest Amazonia, Brazil, just the border with Colombia. Classifiers are assigned to a noun referent on the basis of universal properties, animacy, gender, shape, arrangement, fine. But there are about 100 classifiers. 49 characterize the referent in terms of its function. And many of those reflect environmental features, means of subsistence, and just cultural preoccupations of speakers. Let me give you this example, how classifiers are used as agreement markers on adjectives, demonstrative, possessive constructions, and noun itself. Now, this example was, well, I don't elicit when I do fieldwork, but the interesting thing is that this was an example spontaneously produced in my recent sort of fieldwork endeavor via WhatsApp. So my brother, who is the author of this wonderful sentence, asked me to give him money for a canoe, which I ended up doing in a sort of indirect way. What he said, "No hai tahwe hanuhwe, no hanu mai no hani nivya, di baleka kadia, pahwe tahwe se center na kakawenya isenuku, 7 metru yamhe." So here. What does this here do? It marks the fact that it's a canoe on the noun, noun, well, it just has to be there. It appears as agreement mark on adjective big. It appears as an agreement mark on the passivized verb. It appears on the number 1, and then it appears in the possessive construction. A canoe of a sort of 7 meters canoe. You don't have to repeat the word canoe, you just do with classifier, which also shows you there were people, I think even Craig, said that classifiers have no function. Of course they do. I can just say, centimetru yavhia. I want a centimetru yavhia. I want a 7 meter long canoe. I don't have to use the word canoe. Classifier does it all. So it makes my life a little bit shorter. But this sentence was, maybe he produced it to persuade me, so, and he succeeded. I paid him. I mean, I sent him money, is what it means. So who are the Taryan? The Taryan speak, they're river dwellers. Their villages are located on the banks of the Valpes River, a tributary of the Rio Negro, just off the Amazon. But it's a huge river. You can see the other bank, but you have to have good eyes for that. And the river is a major source of livelihood. A means of communication is by canoes. The existence of a specific classifier for canoe reflects this environment. It's really central. And that's what other neighboring groups like the Canons, the Teutons do as well. This is what it looks like. This is not the Valpes River, it's a different river, but you can see how people are very comfortable on these canoes, the river called Yari. Here are some specific classifiers which reflect the riverine environment. You have a classifier for island, extended part of a river, lake, gorge, mouth of a river, swampy area, riverway, ravine-like riverway, quite a lot. Then let's have a look at classifiers for means of subsistence and material culture. You have a bow. Of course, in Indian, it's just think of an American Indian, they have a bow and an arrow. So here's classifier for bow, classifier for trap for animals, patch of naturally growing plants, plantation, manioc, which is a staple, and manioc bread. Now, each of the items are vital for the livelihoods. The classifier EY, which refers to traps, well, that's how people sort of trap their food. Bow, as I said, is specific to bow, and it's the main hunting instrument, continues to be. The two classifiers distinguish naturally growing patches, lima, and man-made plantations, liki. It's a big difference. So here is a man-made plantation, which is basically this distinction reflects an essential feature of Taryan subsistence, dependence on planted crops in slash and burn agriculture. Manioc is a staple starch. So you do have this classifier for manioc. Actually, is not quite unique because it covers a whole lot of different type of maniocs. You can see kainiki, then you have dapiki, you have kanaliki. And manioc bread is the major type of starch. And of course, it does warrant a special classifier for manioc bread. Kuthe, this is what it means, what it looks like, a woman making manioc. It's quite nice to eat for about half an hour while it's fresh. Otherwise, after that, you break your teeth. But that's okay. You can dunk it in something. So, specific classifiers reflect cultural concerns and practices. They tell us something about what's important for the speakers. But not every specific classifier can be linked to a cultural practice or salience. Now, what's so special about umbrellas in Indonesia? Does it rain more than anywhere else? Probably not. Why does Hakaltek have a classifier for dog and Akatek doesn't? Well, there are lots of things we still don't know. And here I will refer to one of my favorite scholars, Felix Amica, who knows that from an ethnosyntactic point of view, today's grammatical constructions may reflect cultural preoccupations of yesterday. So it may be that we're dealing with societal practices and preoccupations of the past, which are not synchronically explainable anymore. Okay, let's get to the functions of these specific classifiers. All classifiers categorize a reference somehow in terms of recurrent semantic parameters. They're not redundant. They have a lot of jobs to do. They share quite a few functional features. For one, they can be used anaphorically to refer to a previously mentioned entity, and are used as reference tracking devices, and also their choice correlates with individuation of referent, definiteness, and specificity. You can just, well, I've been on a canoe for about 5 days, and you don't hear a noun, you just refer to everything with a classifier. Now, the use of numeral classifiers is linked to unitization of a reference, so then it's countable. And classifiers can disambiguate polysemous reference. Let's get back to Ngajitimery, Dali language. Here, let's see how different exact kinds of yavur stick are differentiated by noun classifiers. This is very similar to Anton Becker's classic piece about how different meanings associated with a noun river in Burmese can be distinguished through the use of numeral classifiers. So in Ngajitimery, you can have a stick for fighting, in which case it will be Siri Yavur. I'm sorry, Nick Reed will not be happy with my pronunciation, so that will not do it. I never heard it spoken. If you talk about stick for digging, fine, you use the same noun with the different noun classifiers. If you want a stick for burning, perfect, you use another noun classifier. So you see they are really rich with use. And specific classifiers share syntactic and pragmatic functions with those classifiers who really do classify something based on more general parameters, shape, form, and animacy. The only difference is they don't really classify. They not so much delimit a class of reference, but they highlight one referent or restricted subgroup, like a beacon for integration points between the language and the socio-cultural environment of the speaker. We call them in our volume, The Integration of Language and Society, edited by myself, Bob Dixon, and Nerida Jarki. We call them integration points. But they're also sensitive to changes in social and cultural environment. And then we look at their place in the historical development of noun categorization, and then very briefly, what's happening to them in child language organization. So, when a societal practice or an object reflected in a specific classifier becomes obsolete if you want, and drops out of use, so does the classifiers. Classifiers whose assignment is based on general properties are more resilient to language obsolescence and more resistant to change. So, in Japanese, numerous specific classifiers referring to objects which are no longer used are just not used. So there are a few like Shoku suits of armor or Kashira Buddhist images mentioned by Pamela Downey. And in Cahuilla, Uto-Aztecan language had a special possessive classifiers for animals belonging to a moiety, sort of class of people who can intermarry each other. Moieties are gone, and the classifier was no longer used when Hans Jakob Zeiler, the late young Hans Jakob Zeiler, was working on that. In Minangkabau, Rina Marnita, a former student of mine, described the drastic reduction in the system of numeral classifiers together with the narrowing of the spheres in which the language is used. So basically, people don't know specific classifiers anymore. They just use bois for thing. And the increase of low measure terms, this contributes to the loss of traditional mensual classifiers. So people just don't know things like kapalo, a piece of palm leaf used for smoking, or tambo, big amount of tobacco. They probably still smoke, but they don't use them. In fact, as I said, they just use bois thing or European measure terms. And obsolescence and loss of specific classifiers, it's almost like loss of lexical items whose reference is not known anymore. What is happening in NIF? Well, fishing used to be the main activity, and we had numeral, the NIF, specific mensual classifiers referring to these means of subsistence, which you have seen. Now, even fluent speakers do not remember, they can't even recognize any of them. Some people still use, well, they're sort of not fluent, but they still know some things. They still use numeral classifiers, but they use the general one, human, non-human, one-dimensional, three-dimensional. And the process of general obsolescence of NIF has exacerbated the demise of classifiers. Possibly it's to do with language shift to Russian. Now, what happens in language history is that classifiers with more general semantics often come from nouns with specific meanings. And the mechanisms may involve part-to-whole extension. For instance, eye can be extended to classify human reference, or tail to categorize animals, as in Menangaba or fish. A typical source of classifiers referring to round objects is the word for fruit or stone, tree or stick, as batang in Menangaba, I think Indonesian as well, classifier for long objects. So you can see what specific classifiers are good for. They're good as a sort of pool for developing more general ones. Point of departure for the evolution of other classifiers. So interestingly, a specific or unique classifier can follow a similar path within the attested history of a language. It may expand to cover more than one referent based on the function or another property they share if necessity arises. Let's get back to this classifier here in Taryan. The people used to use canoes as the only mean of transportation because there was no, they had no cars, obviously, or horses or anything. As the Taryan started acquiring knowledge of and access to other means of transport, we are basically expanded to cover any means of transportation. We have new derivations like something that rolls is a car, something that flies is an airplane, and they can contain here. The interesting thing is that this happened in the lifetime of those speakers who were born like in the 1910s or maybe even earlier. I still met them, and they commented on the fact that now you can use here to refer to more than a canoe. So it makes sense. You say to work on a language for more than 30 years, then you still get to talk to clever and wonderful older people. So what do specific classifiers do in language history? They constitute the pool of potential forms which can give rise to further, more general devices. The process of semantic extension is gradual. It also depends on individual proficiency and the inventiveness of speakers and their metalinguistic awareness. So specific classifiers are wonderful for historical linguists because they give you an idea of the pathways of diachronic development. Now, in child language acquisition and in language dissolution, here I have to disappoint you because specific classifiers are losing it. They tend to have lower frequency than those classifiers which are based on more general properties. And well, look at Japanese. It has a large number of classifiers. Everyone, all the sort of sources, I'm quoting two, but there are more. Only fraction of those are in frequent use. And as Nerida Jarki and Hiroko Komatsu put it in our volume 2019, it doesn't that people don't really use these classifiers. It doesn't mean they don't know them. They know them. They're just very rare. As a result, children do not learn them. It takes them until about the age about 10 or 11 to sort of master them. Along similar lines, you have Taryan classifiers which refer to manioc plantations. They're only used if you talk about manioc plantation. It took me actually about 15 years to find them at all. And the comparatively low frequency of specific classifiers is connected to the fact they don't come up in conversations and caretakers don't use them for children, and so they are acquired later. And that's sort of the results by Sanchez, well, who says the rarer the items, the later the acquisition. We have the same for Mandarin Chinese, demonstrated by Hu, and for Cantonese, and in Thai. So it's almost like we are repeating the same story again. My favorite sort of point here is Kathy Carpenter's, the title of Kathy Carpenter's 1991 paper, later rather than sooner. All these rare specific classifiers are not acquired until the child is like 12 or 14. And patterns of language dissolution in aphasia is a mirror image of the acquisition by children. We don't have too many studies, but it does appear that specific classifiers lose it in the aphasic disruption pretty early in the game. So now what can we conclude? The utility of specific classifiers. Firstly, assigning a classifier to a referent does involve its categorization in terms of basic parameters, cognitively silent parameters. Specific and unique classifiers do something else. They highlight items and their subsets, which are important for the social cultural environment, covering the, as Colette Craig, when she was still Craig, put it, the organization of the powers that be and social organization of the community. Specific classifiers can be seen as linguistic correlates to focal points in socio-cultural physical environment. They categorize not the way people see things, but rather the unique world of each group of speakers. This is in contrast to other classifiers, which reflect shape-based, animacy-based, pan-human perceptual categories. Classifiers based on general properties offer a window into general workings of people's minds, but specific and unique classifiers offer a snapshot into how people live and their predilections. Now, specific classifiers stand apart from others in a number of further ways. First, they are likely to be lost, as if an object or a practice they reflect is lost. They don't have to be. Now, why? Again, we don't know. It'd be nice to know. They tend to be less frequently used than classifiers based on more general parameters, and their frequency may be linked to communicative necessity. So if I am competent to talk about maniocs, I will fruit manioc type of manioc, I will talk about it and use the classifier. If I am not, sorry, I live in town and drink Coca-Cola, eat chips made of potatoes, then I won't use them, which is the case with some Indians. Now, specific classifiers are acquired later than the general one. They are easily lost in language dissolution. Their particular sort of beauty is that they're a point of departure for the development of classifier system with more general semantics, which is based on universal parameters of humanness, animacy, shape, and consistency. Now, we can recall that of the languages with specific classifier discussed here, Indonesian has several dozen numeral classifiers, Lao has at least 80, Thai, Mandarin at least 120, Korean has 154, Japanese has over 100, Taryan has about 100. If we talk about Malta, remember, has at least, well, 15 or 20. So basically, it has to be a big system to allow to be able to afford specific classifiers. It's actually of the spoils of the riches, if you might want to say. Semantics parameters in classifier systems vary. Minimal systems will involve human versus non-human. You remember Kuruh and Telugu in Canada, of course, Emino's classic article, Maria Emino's classic article gives you some idea. And then wonderful article by Bhattacharya in 1990 as well. A larger system will involve human, non-human animates, and then animates. We find that for numeral classifiers in Hakaltek and in Squamish of Salish language. Then you can have further distinction based on shape, like in Bengali, which I think is Uma's first language, which is why I sort of, it's really wonderful. Human, rectangular, two-dimensional object, flat and long one-dimensional object. I found there sort of more recent reference than I had before. Semantic parameters, of course, differ depending on the type of classifier, but we can sort of have a provisional hierarchy of expected distinction in noun categorization system that the following: human, non-human, you have to have human, non-human to have animate and animate. If you have one of those, you have shape, because there are some exceptions. Shape is round or two-dimensional. If you have that, you may have flat or one-dimensional. If you have that, you can have consistency, and only if you have all these combinations can you afford specific classifiers. So a prerogative for having specific classifiers is the presence of classifiers whose distinctions are based on general parameters. And so back to the question, what do classifiers and other categorization devices in general actually do? Hypothesis one. Well, the presence and the choice of classifiers are shaped by the general categories of the perceptible world, and that's what much of the literature says. Hypothesis two. Classifiers reflect the cultural preoccupation of the speakers and the practical consequences of important distinctions for people's lives. And, both are true, fine. Noun categorization devices, especially big systems, serve two masters. humans are interested in acknowledging the perceptually most salient characteristics as the basic level of categorization, as all these cognitively salient features, properties, humanness, animus, and so on, and shape. The basic systems will directly reflect this perceptual salience. And this is akin to the intellectualist approach to naming by Berlin, 1992. So noun categorization devices whose assignment is based on universal parameters can be said to stand out as beacons on the landscape of universal basics of general concepts. Another approach is utilitarian. You name what you use, what you want to name. And of course, classifiers do that as well. Noun categorization devices that are culture specific, this is guided by the practical consequence and importance of individual items. And they're beacons of cultural diversity and the special features of each culture and society. And I've shown you some examples where it's absolutely obvious, but there are lots of examples where we're a little bit lost just because we don't know enough of the language history. Now, one further issue, why is it so that noun classes hardly ever have any specific or unique items? Same applies to deictic and locative classifiers. And same applies to verbal classifiers on verbs. Why? Well, I think we have an explanation for that. Because verbal classifiers which occur with verbs to categorize intransitive subject or an object, whose assignment is based on shape and consistency mostly, hardly ever animacy, but it happens as well, are often limited to just one subtype of verbs. And so maybe they're not found there because they are limited to a close class of verbs in the first place. But we still need sort of to understand more why this is not happening. What about sign languages, you can ask? The choice of noun classifiers and verbal classifiers in sign languages are associated with typical shape. It is just the way the modality works. It's the way your sort of hands operate. Maybe that explains the absence of classifiers with restricted and specific meanings in this modality. And so we can see that users of noun categorization devices provide a unique insight into categorization of the world. At the same time, in complex multi-term system, noun categorization devices are often culture specific. So you have kinship relations and social categories in Southeast Asian languages. River-dwelling people forever have a classifier for canoe. So if somebody lives in the desert, you probably wouldn't have that, probably. So they reflect cultural preoccupation of the speakers, as Amika put it. Now, just a tiny little envoi, classifiers with specific or restricted semantics are actually not one, but they're a heterogeneous set. We really not so much can, but we probably have to distinguish classifiers which refer to restricted categories like a type of field and sets of items, such as set of songs or plantation, and classifiers that would refer to one individual type item, like a canoe. And the typical process of historical development will look like this. Classifier referring to an individual item would probably develop into a classifier referring to a restricted set based on important properties. And interestingly enough, this is what we have just seen and what I saw in my lifetime, which is quite sort of last sort of 30 years, perhaps, with the Taryan classifier for canoe, which now is a general classifier for locomotion. So you can see how fieldwork over years and years and years and years pays off. And so here are some of the books which I'm prepared to share where some of these issues are discussed. And if you want to know where my database comes from, the whole world is our oyster. It's about 600 plus languages. Thanks so much.
Thank you very much, Professor Aikhenvald, for your wonderful, stimulating talk. You took us into a beautiful virtual journey of classifiers and exposed us to different worldviews of various cultures, the ways of living of different people across several continents. Noun categorization devices are indeed one of the most amazing devices people use. Professor Aikhenvald started with the overview of those devices and introduced this august audience to a variety of devices: noun classifiers, numeral classifiers, verbal classifiers, locative, possessive classifiers, their characteristics, parameters of categorization, especially the two important types, the generic classifiers and the specific ones, the utility of classifiers, semantic range of specific and unique classifiers. She also highlighted the correlation between social categories and classifiers with insights from a variety of languages such as Malto, Thai, Australian languages, Mandarin Chinese, Korean, Lao, Arawakan languages, where she has worked quite a bit in Brazil. She discussed a lot about special classifiers, generic classifiers, and focused especially on specific classifiers. The talk was titled One of a Kind on the Utility of Specific Classifiers. I must say this talk itself is one of a kind, introducing and providing us an overview of what to expect when it comes to classification of nouns. And there is no one way to classify these the nouns and classifiers are culture specific. She move on to say that specific classifiers will be lost if a practice or a hierarchy they reflect undergoes attrition. She discussed about the origin of classifiers, what they're good for, their place in language acquisition, language dissolution, etc., and concluded by saying that specific classifiers are indeed very different. They stand apart from the rest of them. She also formulated two hypotheses, and from her own research for more than 3 decades, she has concluded that the hypotheses are true. She also briefed about verbal classifiers, and I was very happy to also note that she has turned her attention on also how people describe or categorize nouns in sign languages, especially not only nouns, even verbs. The choice of noun classifiers and verb classifiers is mostly based on shape as one of the semantic parameters according to her. She concluded by saying that noun classification devices are culture specific. So I tried to just give a brief summary of a wonderful talk. I might have missed many things. Now the talk is open for discussions. Please feel free to raise your questions, provide feedback or comments. Thank you, Sasha. And inside, like we have quite a bit of people in the Google Meet and also a few of them in YouTube. So please feel free to interact with the speaker.
Thank you, yes.
Any questions?
I think
Come
there
on.
was something from Ludmila and from Avid Ali, I think, but I'm not sure. Just the lights.
Yeah, maybe Sasha, maybe you can close your presentation, stop presentation, and people
Okay,
can see
good,
you.
yes.
It would be
Yes.
great.
Yes. Yes.
Yes. So, may I ask a question?
Yes, sure.
Yes, please.
Yes. I wanted to ask, is it grammar? Usually, we think that grammar means obligatory usage of some parameters of. So here, where is the border? These classifiers are they always, maybe there are sometimes they are obligatory, sometimes they are optional, and you say that children don't use them in some cultures. So does it mean that their language is different? And for instance, in Russian, буханка хлеба or качан капусты, are they classifiers or is it grammar? And one more question. You showed that sometimes classifiers are used instead of words when instead of nouns. Is it typical thing or it is only in the language you quoted?
Thank you so much, Ludmila. It's really very interesting questions, and I won't be able to do them justice, but it's great. Actually, the first question, to what extent classifiers are obligatory, it varies from language to language. And in Mandarin Chinese, for instance, as Mary Erbo showed, children tend to overuse the generic classifier, the ge. But if they omit, classifiers can be omitted at in some constructions, but they sort of overdo their mission. And again, in some languages, classifiers can be omitted, but again, it's under some specific circumstances. So classifiers are part of grammar in as much as even if they're not obligatory, there are some rules kind of governing when they can be omitted. And it's a very good question. It's been debated in the literature quite a lot, whether English and whatever other European languages, including Russian, with the kachan kapusta or the head of cabbage, whether these constructions can be considered classificatory construction. Basically, I would say no. It is just their construction. It's a type of genitival construction in both languages, which reflect arrangement in quantity expressions. It's just to express because they do not align with the use of any other classificatory means with, say, a number words. Now, for Russian, what you could say, you're absolutely right. What do I do about 5 человек детей? 5 people, children, where these people can be considered an incipient numeral classifier. And there was a paper, I think, on Bulgarian dealing with that. And basically, this question goes back to Greenberg. We probably can say that Russian may be considered as having very incipient numeral classifiers. But then you can also rephrase 5 человек детей as 5 детей, and there is a little bit of difference. I'm still not sure what it is. So it is a very sort of touch and go kind of situation. In English, you have head of cabbage, but then you also can have a slip of a girl, a very thin girl. It's not really, it doesn't classify a girl as a slip. It tells you something about her shape. It's a shape expression which can be, it doesn't have to sort of fit into any classifier construction, which would be the case in languages with kind of real classifiers. Now, with regard to anaphoric uses of classifiers, you find that in many languages where classifiers, especially those where classifiers are used, are independent words. It's not the case in Taryan, but it's been described for, say, for as recently supervised a thesis on white Hmong. You just use these classifiers on their own and you know what you're talking about. So it is quite a common way of using them. There was even a book, Discourse Function of Vietnamese Classifiers, which basically said the same thing, that you can just talk, you can have a whole stretch of discourse and you don't have to mention the noun because the noun is obvious from the context. For noun classifiers, it may be a bit different, because oftentimes you sort of ask a question. I think Bob had some examples from Eden like that. What kind of person came? So you omit the noun, you keep the classifier, and then you'll say person go came. So you have, but you have reasonably strictly defined rules for omission or inclusion of the classifier. And this is what sort of makes the grammar of classifiers such an interesting enterprise, because they do so many things. Did I answer your questions?
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, can I ask a question? Am I audible? Hello?
Sure,
Maji?
yes.
Okay, hello,
Yes,
ma'am.
yes.
Thank you for that wonderful presentation. I was not able to attend from the beginning, but towards the end, I was able to pick up some. So my question is the following. If you recollect, the Kukichin subgroup of the Tibeto-Burman languages tend to have some sort of idiophone or some expressive like idiophone, or some call it timing. Others
Yeah.
call it verbal classifiers. So this gives you this kind of what you call idiophones. It gives you some extra information about the action or about the property of the object. So would you call these idiophones or timings, or some people call it verbal classifiers, as
Yes.
real classifiers, or how do we group these classifiers that we find in Kukichin languages of the Tibeto-Burman branch?
Yeah, it's a great question, actually. Thank you for that. Well, in languages like Thai or Hmong, for that matter, there is, or Ersu, so many Tibeto-Burman languages, as well as other languages, say Hmong Mien or Thai Kadai. You can actually take some of the numeral classifiers and use them in the same sense as sort of times. Like one time round refers to time as a sort of period of time, or one time long refers to a long day. So are they classified? There's the same form as numeral classifiers, not all, but some of the numeral classifiers. So what do they classify? Well, they are not noun categorization devices because they categorize something else. And Mary Haas in 1942, I think, decided to call them verbal classifiers, which in actual fact is okay because they do classify the action, so they classify the verb, but it clashes with the morphemes on the verb that classify nouns. So we now call them action classifiers. And these action classifiers is more or less what you're talking about, I think, in Kukichin languages, because I've supervised a few students working in Tibeto-Burman languages, and it is quite a recurrent feature. So I wouldn't really call them, nominal categorization devices, because they don't classify nouns or categorize nouns. They categorize something else. So you can still, obviously one can call them classifiers, but then it's good to specify what they classify. They sort of put your action in context, or they categorize the action. So we now, I mean, the term action classifiers is, I think, the accepted one. And it's discussed, if I remember rightly, because I've been sort of looking into it so much, I remember the page number, page 20 or some 22 of this volume on genders and classifiers, which I can send you. And there are quite a few examples there. So they are classifiers, except they don't really classify nouns or categorize nouns. Of course, they're classifiers. Then there was also a lot of work on Australian languages, basically, interestingly enough, led by the late Michael Silverstein, who described so-called, there are some, in languages like Nangjitimir and Murimpata, there are very interesting complex predicates which consist of a sort of general verb and the verb that provides the semantics. And the combinations are very difficult to predict. I don't know how people learn this language, very complicated. But Michael Silverstein, I think it was 1986, suggested that these generic verbs, because they vary depending on the specific verb, that they be called verbal classifiers. But again, we clash with the other verbal classifiers. So we can call them either generic verbs or action classifiers or predicate classifiers. So that's fine. In as much as we can use any term, in as much as we understand what is actually happening. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, ma'am. Thank you.
Any other question or feedback? Sasha, if you can close your presentation, people can see you properly. You're now appearing in a small screen.
Okay. If there are no further questions, I would like to ask another general question.
Sure.
I'm not. Yeah, I'm not very sure, but classifier systems with respect to South Asian languages, they tend to disappear as we move away from South Asian languages. So the number of classifier reduces. So is classifier a property of a language that is subject to constant change, or is it somewhat genetically quite resilient? What is your experience about this nature of classifying languages? So how do they tend to preserve or otherwise tend to give up? So what is the resilience nature of this property of classifiers across languages that you look into it?
Thank you. It's really it's a wonderful question. Well, classifiers are known to be aerially diffusible. And I think, if I remember correctly, in my Bible on Dravidian languages, Professor Krishnamurti said that there may be some Tibeto-Burman or Munda influence in the emergence of classifiers in Dravidian languages. So languages develop classifiers as they move as they sort of get into contact with languages that already have them. But oftentimes we can reconstruct classifiers as properties of proto-language. So I think they have both. They are genetically quite resilient. And at the same time, once a language gets in contact with those who sort of have this way of speaking, they acquire them as well. And that's in Taryan, for instance. Its closest relative has, well, not as many classifiers, but quite a few. But then Taryan developed some classifier contexts just because their neighbors had them. It's classifiers with demonstrative. So classifiers are quite versatile. And I would say that specific classifiers are probably the most aerially diffusible one, because their diffusion appears to go together with the diffusion of cultural items. But it would be really interesting to do a study across, especially across South Asian languages, because it hasn't been done yet, to just see how the number of classifiers reduces or increases depending on language contact. There was an article by, I think, Ulrike Kölver, and Uma will correct me if I'm saying something wrong. She was arguing that Bengali basically diminished the functionality of gender and developed classifiers based on contact with some languages. She didn't identify which. So again, classifiers just come up because of this aerial pressure. And that's also what you would see in Murray Eminow's classical article, 1956. The classifiers, numeral classifiers, are an aerial feature of Indian languages. Now, so it means that they are easy to get. Now, how easy they are to lose is a big question. And they're probably, well, in language obsolescence, like in NIF, when you have NIF in contact with Russian doesn't have numeral classifiers, but then NIF is dying anyway. So it's probably just, it's losing other categories as well. So to what extent the classifiers are lost in language contact is sometimes something of an open question. There is now a very interesting piece of work on Tarascan, or Purepecha, now it's known, in Mexico and Isolate. Claudine Chamorro did a wonderful, she was lucky. She had documents from 17th century, and then she worked on the language herself, how the number of classifiers gradually diminished, and the language is in contact with Spanish. So that shows you that once put sort of in contact with languages without classifiers, classifiers may go. But then we need to know exactly what's happening and whether it's language obsolescence and what sort of contact it is. So I think it's really a very, very, a question. I could probably give another lecture. Many other people could do it better than me on that topic. It's really a very, very hot topic. Thank you.
There is one comment from Professor Shyam Sundar Bhattacharya. He is a retired professor. Yeah, he has given a comment on YouTube, so I'm just seeing that. He says that your talk reminds him of his experience of working on numeral classifiers in Coke Baroque and Bodo languages. So I would like to add one more thing here to his comment, because just now Pautang Hokip was talking about noun classifiers in Ukichin, and also probably there is a chance of looking into verbal classifiers as well. We are yet to confirm that. Among the Tibeto-Burman languages of Northeast India, with my limited experience of working on those for 8 years, I found that the Kukichin languages have noun classifiers, whereas Bodo-Garo languages have numeral classifiers.
Good.
So, and then we also see languages with multiple classifier systems. I know, like, since the time was limited, you did not touch upon that. But in my own database, I have about languages, like 8 languages, where you can do the stacking of classifiers in such a way, like you see that a noun is described and it attains its meaning based on the whatever, depending on their culture, of course, the lastmost or the rightmost morpheme, which is suffix to the noun, gives the primary meaning. So there are interesting things happening in Kukichin. I myself have 3 questions to you. The first question is, you talked about special classifiers, because this terminology confusions are always there for many of us working on different classifier systems in India, especially. You gave the examples of the status of elephants in Thai. So how are these special classifiers different from unique classifiers? Because you also introduced unique classifiers, and we also have in many Kukichin languages, like for flower, or there will be a classifier only for one particular category. So in my understanding, that is used. So how is this special classifier different from the unique classifiers?
Well, you see, I think it depends on the system, because in some languages you have special classifiers. You can apply the term special classifier to to classifiers with very restricted semantics. Like, for instance, a classifier for hammocks or for rice fields. There can be different types of rice fields, like 5 types of rice fields under these specific classifiers. At the same time, you can have a classifier which is just used to one referent. So that's a unique classifier. But I agree, many people use these 2 terms kind of interchangeably, and it would be good if they were used with a little bit more logic. And this is what I would suggest: specific versus unique. Specific is a restricted classifiers with restricted semantics. Unique is just for one item, like you're saying, for one particular flower, or for one, say, for one type of currency, something like that. The problem with specific and unique classifiers is that many people, when they are describing such systems, they don't know what to do with them. They just think, well, you know, we have all these.
When we talk about unique, if you're saying it's attached, or if it describes one particular noun, how is it going to be different from, like, of course, a class noun will include there will be more members in a class noun, whereas here you will have only one member, mathematically speaking, only one member for a unique classifier set.
Yes, there'll be just one. Yeah, class nouns also do not occupy, I mean, in languages that have class nouns, I'm just thinking of Scott Dalance's work on Tibetan. They do not really occupy a classifier slot. And they are, well, like berries, or like sort of genetics, like a word people. So you can say Thai people or Lao people. People will be a class noun. But classifiers are different because there will be a grammatical kind of position attached to them and a set of grammatical functions. But class nouns typically have a generic sort of generic meaning, rather than you wouldn't really necessarily have a class noun for just one thing, I think.
Yes,
So,
yeah. Because they have more members in a class now. Like, for
Yeah.
example, like bay or tree, you can have more members.
yeah, 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 yeah.
So, all right. Thank you for that. I have two more questions. Like another, again coming to the terminology, because people use mensural classifiers in one sense and measure terms.
Yeah.
Because what is your take on this?
Well, I had I think it's probably chapter 3 of my classifier book. I would try and separate them as much as I can, because mensural classifiers are a type of classifiers. They go into a classifier slot. It is that their meaning is to do with type of measurement, with very often with mass nouns. And measure terms have different syntactic properties normally. Now, a measure term will be like a numeral or number word. In some languages, it is a big problem. Like I think in Chinese, they still haven't decided whether how to distinguish between measured terms and mensural classifiers. In others, I think there was quite a nice discussion. I think it was Akatak, where they just have different uses. Like, for instance, measure terms say much or many. May show correlations with mass or count, and they also may require absence or presence of plural on the noun when classifiers don't. So I would basically try and separate them as much as possible. And if you can't separate them, then it's a sort of interesting issue. It means that maybe the language doesn't make this distinction. But it is a very sort of big issue for languages with mensural classifiers, especially isolating languages where you don't really have much morphology there, you may be a bit in trouble.
Do you think calling something measure terms again is culture specific? Because some cultures may use numerical elements to measure something. There could be morphemes which are specifying or signifying numbers or quantity, whereas there could be other linguistic elements which are used for measuring. Because there are cultures, I remember people are talking about in some cultures, you're from, of course, you have worked in PNG as well. There are some languages in PNG where they measure using yams, so sixes. So that's the culture. So it's not the number, it is a practice. So
absolutely, yes, it's very culture specific. There are other areas in New Guinea where they count, where they sort of use body as a measure term. So you sort of count on your body, it's up to 26 or something like that. Of course, this it's called scenery system with yams, configuration of yams in this sort of like almost a star-like position in 6 numbers. It's what Nick Evans probably talked about in his lecture here. Of course, measure terms are very, very culture specific, and measure terms are also amenable to loss. And in many languages, they're being replaced by Western measure terms. So people don't use traditional ones. They will just say, well, kilo or kilometer or something like that. And it basically contributes to the difficulty in distinguishing measure terms from mensural classifiers. But then, yeah, that's one of the analytical difficulties that we face.
Okay, thank you.
It's not terminological, it's analytical, basically.
Okay, thank you. One more question from me. I'm sorry I'm asking you so many things.
It's excellent.
Classifiers are one of my favorite topics, and I'm just fascinated by your talk. So one more question from my side. See, you mentioned that classifiers can disambiguate polysemous words. That is like for ambiguity resolution. It's interesting. But how about homonymous words? Because
say it again, I couldn't hear it very well.
How about homonymous words? Homonymous words.
Yes, that's a good question. Yes, I mean, if they are homonyms, then well, it's hard, but possibly classifiers could also
because at the surface level, yeah, at the surface level, when someone looks at a word, it's not possible to say whether what classifier one should. Suppose in a learning environment, in a language learning environment, suppose you're teaching a classifier language to a speaker of non-classifying language, I would be confused as what goes with what. So if they are ambiguous, and suppose I would, if you're saying that the classic or a suffix or maybe a free morpheme depends on the language. If you're using a classifier in a noun phrase and you're saying if it is a free morpheme, you need other devices. But if it is bound morpheme, when you are attaching it to as a prefix or a suffix, it may help to disambiguate, but still we need the context in order to pick the right element, right?
Absolutely, yes. I mean, the context, of course, is the most important thing, especially if we're dealing with oral languages, where languages with a lot of ellipses. Absolutely. Now, but classifiers for homonyms, I've never thought of it, but I think they probably will do the same. Well, we can just think about it. Like in English, you have a sort of the famous pair of homonyms, ear as a human ear and ear of corn. And for a normal English speaker, they're homonyms. I mean, we historical linguists, well, now they have different origins. But of course, ear will take a classifier for sort of body part, and the ear of corn is a different shape, so it will take a different classifier. So the answer is yes, of course. So classifiers are so versatile that they'll be used for many sort of.
Yeah, they are going to remain a spotlight for many, many more decades, I believe. Yeah, thank you so much. One more comment from Gautam Bora on YouTube. He also has worked on, he says your talk reminds him of his own work on numeral classifiers in Assamese. So,
wonderful, thank you. Yes, that's very interesting.
So that's like Bengali, it's like an Indo-Aryan language. Since you have looked into Bengali, Assamese also has numeral classifiers.
Yes.
And there are some people who have worked on numeral classifiers of Indo-Aryan also from various perspectives, aerial typology, aerial linguistics, some of them in descriptive. Some works are there. Maybe it's wonderful to get reminded of various features of classifiers from your talk. Are there any other questions?
Yeah, madam.
Yeah, Alindra. Yeah. Alindra is a Bodo speaker. Yes, Alindra. Bodo also has numeral classifiers.
Yeah, as Madam told, Professor Uma Madam told, Bodo has numeral classifier. And I just wanted to share one more thing about Assamese language. That Assamese actually is, it has a numeral classifier as well as noun classifier. So what happens when the classifiers come with nouns? They actually function like definitives.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Nice.
So this is one thing, and I actually wanted to know about that mensural classifier kind of classifiers. Already I'm clear because Madam has already raised this question. One another thing about classifier is actually can we say classifiers is noun incorporation? Because because the classifiers, they are like nouns. If we see the historical development of the classifiers, they are like derived from nouns. So can we say them noun incorporation also?
Yes, well, it's absolutely true that classifiers, especially verbal classifiers, very often come from a classificatory noun incorporation. I think noun incorporation is a source of many classifiers, including in some North American languages, I think, where they're incorporated into numerals and number words. And yes, they do. They very often have a nominal origin, noun origin. So yes, I mean, noun incorporation is a very interesting mechanism. But it wouldn't be right to say that all classifiers always come from nouns. In some languages, like in Mayan, they come from verbs as well. But noun incorporation is definitely, I think it's very interesting. I look forward to reading your work.
Thank you, bro. Thank you so much.
Yeah, so there are two comments from Samita Bharadwaj in the chat box in Google Meet.
Okay.
She says,
Thank
thank you, ma'am Aikhenvald, for an insightful and comprehensive lecture. Your work
Thank
has
you.
helped me a lot in my research on Assamese, Bodo, and Rabak classifiers. So she has worked on aerial linguistics, and I'm proud to say that the thesis has come out well. I'm her supervisor, so we used your work quite a bit. So we will send a copy of it to you for further comments, and it may help Samita to write more papers and think differently. So
Thank you.
thank you. So any other questions or feedback from others? Yeah, so since there are no other comments, I take this opportunity to thank Professor Aikhenvald for accepting our invitation. He was one of the first few people who agreed immediately when we approached her to deliver a talk for Foundation Day celebrations of CIL. It was so nice of you and sweet of you to accept our invitation and to give us a very, very comprehensive talk of more than 150 slides. And I am very happy that you also sent the slides to us. If you permit us, and if someone would like to read your slides, we will pass it over to interested people. But the talk is already recorded in YouTube. Thank you very much for being with us. And incidentally, I forgot, I should have said that in the beginning. Belated happy birthday to you. I wish we had coordinated it last week. So, yeah, so wonderful to have you with us. And maybe this dialogue will continue because CIL is an institution which works on a variety of languages, big languages and small languages, and there are yet we are yet to discover many precious gems with regard to noun categorization. So I think we will be in constant touch with you and benefit from your scholarship. So on behalf of the Institute and on behalf of the Director CIL and on my own behalf, I thank you, Sasha, for accepting our invitation. It was lovely to have you. Thank you. Do you want to say anything?
No, I just wanted to thank you for all the questions, especially your questions and all the comments. And so we'll be in touch. I look forward to your article. So,
okay, definitely. So we'll be in touch. Thank you, everyone, because we had a nice audience, and I'm sure many more would look into the YouTube and interact with you. I thank each and everyone present here. Have a lovely evening, Sasha, lovely day to some of you, and night to a few of you. Thank you.
You too. Thank you. Have a nice day.
Yeah. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye. Thank you.
Thank you so much, madam.
Bye, bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Everybody.
See you again.
See you.
Yes.
See you, Oma.
See you again. Bye, Lyudmila. Bye. Yeah.